Hello and welcome to the Plan2Peak Health and Human Performance video blog. I am metabolic health practitioner and coach Peter Cummings, and I would like to discuss today periodization and how it can help athletes to optimize their athletic performance. I have a regular blog post on this. I'll be adding that into the show notes along with a PDF of the presentation that I'm going to use today. So if you have any questions, please reach out to me. But let's dive into this. So first of all, let's understand what periodization is. And it's important to realize that periodization is basically the concept of dividing up your training year into specific phases of training. And what this allows you to do is really have a high level of focus in each phase to ensure that particular aspects of your fitness are optimized before moving into the next phase. I know a lot of athletes that like to just mix it up all the time. And I can assure you that keeps you highly fit, but doesn't necessarily really optimize you. And that's exactly what the evidence shows. So periodization is the opposite of just letting it rip how you feel like it, when you feel like it. And it's more about really addressing physiology of the athlete first and foremost. The sequence of these phases are important because they build on one another. This is an aerobic sport. And if you don't have your aerobic system fully optimized before you start doing anaerobic work, you will not get the best benefit. Your aerobic system supports all other physiology, and it actually helps you to recover from those anaerobic efforts. So what you may find is if you have a great anaerobic engine, but the race lasts a little longer than your aerobic base can support it, you just don't have the ability to go with that last move of the race or have anything left in your sprint. And that's why the sequencing of the phases are also important. And ultimately, to achieve your goal, you have to line up your periodization backwards from your priority events. So if you understand that this is a breaking up of phases, the development and sequencing of those phases to optimize your development, and also to plan to peak on a particular day so that we know how to work backwards from there. This is how the periodization process works. So a little bit about the science. I alluded to it, that the aerobic system is really the foundation to your metabolism when it comes to endurance sports. And the aerobic system is really about fueling the lower intensity, longer durations. But as I suggested, it also is the foundation to your ability to recover. So it's crucial in endurance cycling that the aerobic system is maximized. And when I say endurance, you may be thinking, 100-mile races, but even an hour-long race is an endurance event. So optimizing the aerobic system is critical. As you can see on the chart on the left, that you look at the yellow line, that is the lactate curve. When you see a nice flat curve in those first couple sections, as someone's increasing intensity using more oxygen, suggests more intensity, more work, more watts. When it's flat like that, that's an aerobic system that's handling the load. And you don't have to turn on the anaerobic system. While it's always turned on, it's not the predominant energy source. Not until you see that first bend where it says point of lactate threshold, where you start to see an increase from baseline, is the effort starting to recruit more of the anaerobic system. And the anaerobic system is used in shorter durations for higher intensity efforts. So sprints and short climbs and covering gaps and things like that. The anaerobic system is going to be highly utilized in those efforts. And then for the very, very short efforts, like at the very beginning of a time trial or the end of a sprint, this is your ATP creatine phosphate system. So These are critical. And as I suggested, your aerobic system is replenishing these anaerobic systems in this other system. So having a strong aerobic system and optimizing that is going to be critical for your overall success. So when I'm trying to create a training program, or if you'd like to create one for yourself, you have to first to start with some assessment. And I think some of the assessments don't have to do with physiology. They have to do with being honest with yourself. How much time do you really have to invest? Because periodization works best when it has some level of consistency. So if you're thinking, oh, I'm gonna work on my base, and then this week I'm gonna do 15 hours because I'm highly motivated, but next week I'm really busy, and you keep going back and forth like that, that's not really a good periodization model. Where if you ask yourself honestly, how much time do you have on a regular basis, and you figure out that it's 7 hours a week, then what you should be trying to do is optimizing that 7 hours and then working to keep that consistent load. And also be honest with your strengths and weaknesses. If your sprint is bad, then obviously we're going to have to work on your sprint at some point. If you can't climb, if your body composition is holding you back, your fitness level is good, but your body composition is holding you back on hills, for instance, you're not keeping up with the group. So understanding that it starts with an honest assessment of yourself, your strengths, weaknesses, and the time that you have available to commit. Then you need to set some goals based off of that. And you have to define measurable objectives. And you need to understand there's a difference between objectives and goals, right? So goals, you're in control of those, right? Drinking so much water, riding on the bike for so much time, going to the gym, whatever the case may be, those are things within your control. The measurable objectives are things that you should expect to achieve by accomplishing your goals on a regular basis. And you need to have some priority events. As I suggested, you want to work backwards. It's the plan to peak, as it suggests, is on this day, I'm going to be at my best. And then the training plan gets created with your strengths, with your weaknesses, with your availability, and with your objectives in mind. And you work it backwards. So then you create this plan and you allow enough time for your energy systems to fully develop. John Madden used to say, don't leave it till they stop it. And what he was saying was, if something's working, just keep running it. And it's the same thing with your training. When you're seeing a benefit to your aerobic system, and you continue to do aerobic training and you continue to see benefit to your aerobic system, you should just keep doing what you're doing until you no longer see benefit to your aerobic system. That could mean that your plan has to change, or it may be time to move on, depending on how well developed your physiology is. So people who benefit the most from longer base training or aerobic base training, the foundation training, are the people that are really just starting in the sport, because they have the most blue sky to develop, and the aerobic system takes the longest to develop. So this time of year, I'm recording this now. It's in October. It is a transition phase. So it's the first step towards this new season that we have coming up. And during this time period is really important, because you really need to reset the motivation, the goals, and take a good look at what you've learned about yourself, about your season. What do you like? What don't you like? What could you do better? What are the strengths and weaknesses? So this is a time period to focus on some active recovery, less structure, less emails from your coach, but not a time to get out of shape. So this time allows you to back off of the drum roll and really focus on keeping active, maybe doing some things that you haven't done, having a little fun with your exercise, but not necessarily to get out of shape. But it gives you an opportunity to mentally and physically reset. This is also a time where you have to get set to start baseline testing. Your fitness may have changed over transition, and you need to establish your new training zones. Now, heart rate zones typically don't change that much unless you're very new to the sport. But if if you're someone that's been in the sport for 7, 10, 12 years, your heart rate zones are probably going to be the same, but the power that you push in those zones is going to be different. And you need to know that for many reasons when you're prescribing exercise. So conduct some tests, do lactate threshold, just like I did on myself yesterday. Look at your body composition. Can you do better? And try to get a maximum power output number. And then this is a great time of year to really start to address some of the issues that you may have had from a long season. People don't think about this, but we're in a flex position on the bike for piles and piles and miles, right? We're on a bike all the time, and you're in a flex position. Your hip flexors are very tight, and your shoulders may be rounded. You may have neck issues. Your feet are going numb. It may be time for a bike fit. It may be time to get to the gym. It may be time to even see a physical therapist if the issues are bad enough. And you need to correct those. Work on your mobility. Again, active recovery. Do some things to rejuvenate yourself and prepare for the next phase, which is the preparation phase. So in the preparation phase, what we're trying to do is get back into a groove, get back into training mode, looking at our workouts each day and finding time for them rather than just fitting them in like you might want to do in transition, or maybe just not train at all that day. So some of the things that I like to do, especially because so many of my athletes are in the Northeast, I do have them up and down the East and West Coast, but so many of my athletes are in the Northeast, and riding outside becomes difficult in that next phase, which will take place probably in November, beginning of December for many people. And this is why I love strength training. For one, strength training, especially when done correctly, if you see my article on that, you get a whole lot of benefit from that. Injury prevention, it improves your joint strength, and this will, if done properly, benefit you on hills and time trials and sprints. So knowing what to do with your strength training, but having a way to start to get fit that doesn't involve riding a trainer or gutting it outside in 30 degrees, no sun, and wet roads is sometimes a very beneficial, both mental and physically. You can start your low intensity cycling. Your volume should start increasing during the prep phase. Again, you're getting back into a groove, so you're filling in the days that you're not in the gym with low intensity riding, and really start working on things like spin ups, getting your spin back up, getting a high cadence back. There's lots of ways to stay productive and start getting you into training mode without necessarily starting directly with intervals. And work on mobility and stretching. Again, we are in a fixed position quite a bit on our bike, and cyclists aren't necessarily known for their mobility. So working on the overall body, especially in the early phases, working on your postural muscles, a little bit of upper body too. Not that you want to put on a whole lot of muscle mass in the upper body, but it wouldn't be terrible to fill out a shirt and stand up straight. So there's plenty of things that could be done in this initial training phase. Then the real work starts in the aerobic base phase. You're really going to start ramping up the volume, and this typically will last for anywhere from 8 weeks if somebody's in very good shape. They're highly developed, but typically base is a 12-week to 16-week endeavor. And you're really going to be increasing your volume and spending a lot of time in the aerobic training zones. One of the benefits, you may have heard of zone 2 training. Why is zone 2 training such a hot button right now? Well, it's been around forever, but just so you know, what happens in heart rate zone 2, that intensity where you can pass the talk test, is you get a lot of stimulation of the metabolic parameters of our sport, and that really takes place in the mitochondria. So a lot of zone 2 training builds mitochondrial biogenesis. So we're building more mitochondria, and we're building larger, healthier mitochondria. And this builds metabolic capacity and efficiency. So there's a lot of that going on in base. Sometimes it can be boring. Getting outside for your long rides obviously would be good for everyone's head. And you keep working on this aerobic base until it's optimized. This is the foundation to all of your training. You start to gradually increase some intensity, maybe some tempo and sweet spot work, maybe even a little bit of threshold work right near the end of aerobic base training. So your volume's at the highest, you're starting to bring in some intensity during the end of base. And those are pretty challenging because your aerobic system is great. You feel like you can go for long periods of time, especially like in that sweet spot, because you've just built such a huge metabolic engine that riding, a tempo at 80-85% of threshold, you feel like you can do it for very long periods of time. But those short little efforts up near threshold start to become pretty challenging. But you quickly respond to those near the end of aerobic base. And that's when you really start to feel the benefit of building that base and what you've done for yourself. Because ultimately, what we're trying to do in this sport is build a high level of muscular strength endurance. And this is also why good strength training really works. And when I'm talking about strength training, I want to point this out. I'm not sure I put this in the article portion, but the weights that we need to use are not the level of weights that you would see a bodybuilder or a power lifter use. We have to realize that the weight that and the force that we're trying to produce is just higher than what we would ever want in the pedals. So in other words, if you're going up a 18% grade and you're trying to race it, you're not just trying to survive it, you're trying to race it. How hard do you have to push on that pedal? You're gonna continue to shift down until you run out of gears so that you can continue to turn it over, but you're still using a high level of force. When we're in the gym, we don't need to go much higher than that, because if you can do that in the gym, you can do that on a hill. And again, this endurance part of it, it has to be able to be the kind of strength that can last. You go to talk to somebody in the gym, a lot of trainers even, they'll tell you 12 reps, 15 reps. Well, I don't know of any hills that are 12 RPMs, right? Where you do 12 circles of your pedals and you're on the top of the hill and the race is over, right? So you have to be able to produce that level of force for an extended period of time. And that's how strength training is different in the gym for a cyclist compared to what I lovingly call my meatheads. The build phase is when we start to have a little bit more fun, if that's what you want to call it. Obviously, the intensity is higher. They hurt more, but we're really starting to work on speed. And if you've done a great job in your aerobic phase, this is super exciting, because you'll see how fast you recover from these efforts. And these efforts will be at a point that are higher than they were before you built that aerobic base. And that's when you start to become competitive. I think the ante is the aerobic base, what I call making fast easy, right? Because that's what we're talking about here. That lactate curve I was mentioning. When that curve starts to go up, that's when we notice it hurts. Well, the farther you can push that to the right, that bend point, the more watts you can produce, and it still feels easy. That's the guy that looks like he wants to talk to you while you're cruising along at 23 miles an hour, rather than you who's trying to hide on a wheel. So moving that deflection point of when lactate starts to increase, when we start using our anaerobic engine to the right, makes fast easy. But then you eventually have to go really fast. You have to work your anaerobic engine. This is where we start doing race simulation type efforts, threshold training, VO2 max training. And this also helps to prepare you mentally for how bad it's going to hurt when the race goes on, and make sure that you keep challenged with digging deeper and completing your workouts and finishing your efforts the way you're supposed to. You also have to start to really focus on your recovery a little bit more, because these types of efforts while your aerobic system is now fully developed, and that will help you recover. After efforts like this, you're going to need to really start to bring in some focus into a little bit more on recovery nutrition, making sure that you space out your hard workouts far enough apart so that you can still be successful. So when the anaerobic work starts, the focus on recovery really starts to increase. And then the last phase in all of this, you have this huge engine. You can ride at high speeds for long periods of time, and it feels easy. You have race speed. You can fly up hills because your VO2 max is high. You've done all those hard intervals. They're behind you now. It's time to taper and peak. And the way we do that is you reduce the volume in consecutive weeks, but you keep the intensity as high as it's been and slowly increase it over time. This will ensure that you stay race ready, but you freshen, because that's what peak is really about. If you've read the book on peaking by Ennio Mojica, he discusses all the different physiologic changes during the recovery process, but none of them truly correlated with the peak as much as just being fit and fresh, because a fresh athlete will be able to dig harder than one that is tired. So I know the athlete's mind tells you that your training makes you fast. The most important time to back out of that mentality and to understand that now I've gained all my fitness, I need more freshness than fitness, is during the peaking process and the tapering process. And this is a peak that I would use for a priority event. This is not something I would use for a weekend event. So maybe a race that you do every week for 8 weeks or something like that. In that situation, I would only make the second part of the week look like this, and maybe the overall volume be a little bit lower than it was coming into that series. But if it's more of a B priority, something that you want to race because it's local, because it gets you a lot of race experience, this is not the tapering model that I would use for that. So to tie it all up, tell you a little bit about Plan2Peak and how we use this information and data to ensure that the athletes are getting the expected outcomes. Right? You create these plans with objectives in mind. Achieving the objectives are more important than sticking to a plan that's not working. So you have to be ready to change your plan. It's one of the golden rules: is make a plan and then be ready to change it, because sometimes life gets in the way as well. And as you may have heard me say, I've been doing this for quite some time, racing myself for a decade and a half, and I've been coaching now for over 20 years, 11 national champs and counting. And all of my athletes, I think, would tell you that they benefit from the relationship, and trying to make sure that the love of their sport and what they're trying to achieve fits into their life too. I remind people I've worked with some filthy rich people, and the one thing that they have in common with every single other athlete that I've ever worked with is the same amount of time in a day. And we have to figure out how to get this sport and the amount of time that we want to spend in the gym and on the bike to fit in with our families and work and our other responsibilities. And that's where coaching comes in, is it helps to make sense of what you're doing in the context of your life, and how sometimes we can plan to change and tweak the plan ever so slightly while still accomplishing the objectives, but allowing you to prioritize or reprioritize another part of your life. And so we're always working to optimize the training and optimize the entire plan to fit with your life. If you're interested in having a conversation about what I do, we do have a free consultation. I also work in consultation mode. Some athletes just rehire me every few months to look at their data and redirect their programming. I make custom training plans for athletes, and also I have my coaching plans. I have 4 different levels of coaching. So if you're interested, reach out. Thanks for listening. See you again next week.